So with that, I will introduce our presenters. There's three today. Lisa Russell is the manager of student experience, the manager of the student experience office at Student Life on St. John's campus. Danielle Jackson is also with Student Life in St. John's. And Mher Mardoyan is the on-campus employment skills coordinator with Student Life in the St. John's campus. So with that, I'm not sure exactly where we are, guys, but you can go ahead, Mher or Lisa, whoever would like to start.
Just to let you know, I can share now.
Okay.
Okay.
That's great. And good timing.
Good timing, yes. Just opening now the slides and I can share.
Perfect. While you're doing that, Mher, I'll just briefly I guess, address the fact that Jennifer Brown was scheduled to be part of this presentation. And in fact, this project has been spearheaded by her over a number of years. And unfortunately, she wasn't able to be present today to share and take part in the presentation, but just wanted to make sure everyone understood the role that she played in bringing this work to this point, and obviously in helping see it through to its next phase. So the next item, I guess, is just a very quick move into you can move ahead probably to the agenda slide, Mher. And again, we want to start the session off with a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that the lands on which Memorial University's campuses are situated are in the traditional territories of diverse Indigenous groups, and acknowledge with respect the diverse histories and groups and cultures of the Beothuk, Mi'kmaq, Innu, and Inuit of this province. So the agenda just kind of covers what we're going to review for you today. Certainly, if there are, you feel free to use the chat section if there are comments you wish to make as we go through. Preference is for questions at the end where we have left some time for discussion. But if there's anything burning that you want to capture in the moment, feel free to pop it into the chat there. And so as we think about on-campus employment, originally, I think on-campus employment was seen as a means of helping students fund and pay for their education. That's certainly the way in which it was historically developed. However, over time, the understanding of the power of on-campus employment has shifted as the role that universities play in developing and helping prepare our students for the world after university has also shifted. And so this quote that's on the screen now really resonates as that work that we do in post-secondary is not really about preparing students for a job, but rather preparing them for a rich life with a whole variety of experiences, one of which is likely to be some form of paid employment. And so how we choose to do that, how we organize and offer students those developmental opportunities has a lot to do with how they experience what comes after. Moving to the next slide, Mher, thanks. The present discussion really in news media, in kind of coffee shop conversation, somewhat within the academy itself, is around this idea of an awareness gap or a skills gap that graduates have. And there's been a great deal written about this and a presumption that current graduates are lacking in the skills needed to successfully enter the workforce. Recent Google searches for skills gap returns 600 million responses. Some of those would probably be of varying quality or relevance, but nonetheless, a tremendously large result that comes from that. And many articles would reference that need for the non-technical, soft, or human skills that are transferable across multiple settings. And Student Life's position is that we don't have in higher education, in post-secondary, a skills gap, but rather more of a skills awareness gap, in that graduates are not aware of what those skills are that they are building, honing, developing through their time in their post-secondary studies. And so how then can we begin to bridge that awareness gap? And we propose that one way to do that is through developing meaningful, high-impact on-campus employment programs. So this book, A Good Job, provides a whole host of detailed information that supports this work and explores more deeply how it aligns with other experiences that have been defined as high impact. High impact practices were developed by George Koo, and many of you are likely familiar with his work with the National Survey on Student Engagement, which examines a variety of facets of high impact practices and their impact on student engagement over time. When we think about what those characteristics are of high impact practices, it's not hard to see how on-campus employment could align with that. When we look at this next slide, and we look at the elements that are required to be a part of a high impact practice, we see time and effort, right? Intentional time and effort. And then when we look at that and how that aligns with on-campus employment, we have time and effort, right? That is, again, that are dedicated to purposeful tasks. And so the term high impact does refer to these institutionally structured student experiences inside and outside the classroom that are associated with elevated performance across multiple activities, and such as deep learning. And the 6 specific characteristics that are listed here are the required elements for something to be considered a high impact practice. And there's a great deal of literature that has built up around what constitutes a high impact practice, and then the evaluation of those practices. And these characteristics can easily be aligned with on-campus employment that allows us then to use that employment opportunity to help shape a student's experience at university and contribute to skills acquisition and awareness. When we think then about Memorial's context of the Memorial Undergraduate Career Experience Program, this program started in 1992, actually, and it was introduced at a time when tuition was increasing on our campus. And it was seen as a way to help students offset some of their increasing tuition costs. You can move to the next slide there, Mher. And those are, it was offered then in a combination of 40 and 80-hour positions. I think maybe I've skipped ahead. I did. I'm so sorry. There's been some past research that has been done. I'm all out of order. Sorry, folks. Yes, 40 and 80-hour positions. Currently, our budget for MUCEP is $1,170,000 that goes directly into the hands or into the pockets of students. So this is money that is allocated to differing units across campus that pays students to perform work that is relevant and useful within the campus environment. Historically, the highest number of positions have been in the Faculty of Science with 22%, Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences at 16%, then the AVPA Students Portfolio, Residence, Student Life, Wellness and Counseling at 9%. And students are employed in 23 different faculties or offices and 159 different divisions. So a wide cross-section of our campus environment, of our campus community, utilizes MUCEP students in their operations. A learning and reflection agreement that transformed MUCEP from being purely an employment, again, an income, an opportunity for students to earn income, and into an experiential program was introduced in 2005. And that's where we have been up until some of the more recent work to take MUCEP to the very next level. Next slide, Mher. So some of the past research that's been done on MUCEP has been around what skills do employees want and what skills do students gain. And an analysis of over 3,600 learning and reflection agreements that were collected between 2005 and 2018 using an open source tool called Voyant Tools, identified, 5 common skills that students indicated they had built through their time in working in MUCEP programs. Next slide, Mher. And those top 5 skills, as you can see on the screen, were time management, And in terms of some quotes from students on each of these, the skill most enhanced was time management. Being my first MUCEP, it helped me manage time between my studies and my work hours. Time management skills were the most enhanced as I'm enrolled in a very intensive program, so it was not always easy to find extra hours to work. I really had to manage my time well in order to also be able to work part-time. In terms of communication, written, verbal, and confidence, communication was the most enhanced for me. I had to use effective communication skills to help students who were at times frustrated with their issues. Communicating with not only the public, but also with my coworkers during school programs forced me to get out of my comfort zone and talk to a larger group of students. I have also learned how to communicate more effectively and in a professional manner. Professional skills, which encompasses professionalism, work balance, and admin skills. I believe professionalism was a big thing this semester, as I'm used to having a more reserved position where I work in the background. This semester allowed me to test drive my ability to be professional. Research skills, development, literature, critical reading, ability to conduct independent research. I worked to enhance my ability to gather data and keep it well organized, as well as developed a research methodology that was reproducible. I mostly developed my research skills. I learned to be persistent with searching for information online and to check a variety of different sources using different keywords to obtain the results I am looking for. Team and independent work, which encompasses leadership, networking, and responsibility. A skill that was most enhanced was working independently. Working independently taught me how to follow instructions carefully, be aware of my surroundings and actions, and ask questions when given the opportunity. I have become more confident in my ability to work without supervision. The skill that was most enhanced as a result of this MUCEP position is teamwork skills, as all tasks involve working with others in a respectful and cooperative manner. So when we think about these top 5 skills, they're often the same skills that employers say that they need in their newest employees. And every employer, moving on to the next slide, Mher, every employer is looking for these essential skills. And many of the most in-demand skills are transferable and valuable in virtually every industry and role. Employers look for these skills because they're fundamental abilities that allow a candidate to perform the duties and responsibilities of the job. A quick Google search again returns multiple iterations of lists of top skills from a whole variety of sources. Skills Gap returns yet more. Both concepts have a long history in pop culture, career development, human resources, the business world, and the educational sectors. Moving to the next slide, Mher. So the work to integrate a set of student success competencies for Memorial University began in spring of 2019. And it began with Memorial's teaching and learning framework, where it outlined the qualities that Memorial graduates will possess. And from there, other widely recognized current sources of competencies and skills were sought. NACE's key career readiness competencies, employability skills 2000 plus from the Conference Board of Canada, and Memorial's own School of Graduate Studies, graduate student competencies were selected for analysis. Danielle Jackson, who'll be speaking to you in a few minutes, was the project lead on the development of these competencies. And from these initial 4 sources, 10 student success competencies were developed, and you can see the specific titles in gray down the left-hand side of your screen. It will come as no surprise to any of you that there is a great deal of overlap and commonality between all 4 sources, which proved helpful in this process. On the following slide, you'll see how we present this information to students. This document has been shared with senior leaders, students, staff, and faculty for feedback and advice, and there is widespread support for these. They are now in use in a variety of units and are forming the basis of assessing skills and competencies in a diverse array of experiential learning initiatives. So let's take a quick look at these competencies in more detail. Next slide, Mher. Thank you. So this document includes both the competency headings as well as a brief description. At the end of the presentation, through the use of a QR code, you can find a digital version of this document in a Google file. It does exist as well on the Student Life website. These competencies are not only career readiness competencies, of which they absolutely are, but they are also key student success competencies. While career preparedness upon graduation is a key concern for many students, parents, and faculty, and a key focus of these competencies, it isn't always top of mind when there is so much pressure to get through the next semester or the next exam or that last statistics course. This document clearly speaks to students about competencies that they are building that will help them succeed now and next week and next term. But it also offers language to address questions about the ability to succeed after graduation. Having students work toward demonstrable skill sets in each of these areas supports their readiness to find meaningful employment after they graduate. In addition to a need for students and new graduates to develop these competencies, many employers also continue to identify experience as one of the missing pieces. And Danielle is going to talk to us now about some of the current research about on-campus employment and skills development that provides support to both sides of that equation. The skills and the skills awareness and the language to articulate that, but also the experience that students can gain through on-campus employment that grounds the development of those skills. Danielle, over to you.
Thank you, Lisa. So, to continue what Lisa's saying, we do maintain the belief that graduating students possess a number of essential skills during their time at post-secondary, and they're constantly developing them, but they're not always equipped to recognize, sharpen, or articulate these skills. So to take what we've been doing, and we talked about the student success competencies, we took it a step further and we tagged and categorized all of on-campus employment opportunities with the competencies that Lisa had just shared. And to take it a step further, in 2020, Memorial University partnered with RBC Future Launch to pilot the MUCEP Enhancement Project, which looked to provide students with working experience alongside a wraparound of supports to cultivate skill awareness and career development. And we identified a number of areas to participate in this pilot. So we had 4 departments within 2 faculties. We had chemistry, modern language, political science, and psychology, and 2 non-academic units, such as the Writing Center and Student Wellness and Counseling Center. And during the student fall placements, Mher was involved and critical in doing those touch points and ensuring that these conversations were happening between the grant holder and the student. Next slide. So when we look at the current research project, we had 88 student placements in the pilot. There was a pre and post test administered using the RBC tool, and we had an 80% response rate from the pre and post test, which we're going to dive into a little bit more. We had 44 grant holders participating in the pilot, because sometimes with this, although we had more students, one grant holder or one supervisor could be supervising a number of students. And we had a pre and post test administered through Qualtrics, and we had an 82% response rate from grant holders. And the tool that was used with RBC was the Forum Research Portal. Next slide, Mher. Thank you. So we had 157 completed surveys, but I should note that we were only able to analyze 70 student responses. So for a total of 140, 70 pre and 70 post for 140. We had to exclude a number of surveys because the student initials did not match. And we had some students who did not complete both the pre and post test. And the most a student can work with MUCEP, for anyone who has had a MUCEP student in this room, is 80 hours. So they can work an 80-hour or they can work 240 hours for a maximum of 80 hours. And in terms of this program, there was 8 students who were hired for multiple MUCEP opportunities that fell within the enhancement program. So their pre and post test was only collected and interpreted once. So we're going to dive into some of the results we got back, and we're going to start with demographics. So when we look at demographics, males represented 29% of the students who participated, females were 70%, and this is not uncommon because that breakdown actually is very true to the larger fall 2021 breakdown, where we had, I believe it was 60 female students who participated and 40 male. So that sample size is not unusual when you think about gender breakdown. When we look at ethnicity, the majority who participated were whites, and then we had following up with that was South Asian represented 9%. And then it was very similar in terms of percentages for the remaining students. Okay, we'll go to the next slide. Okay, so demographics. When we look a little bit further in terms of the students who participated, who identified as being part of the LGBT plus community, we had 26%. And within the students who participated, we had 17% who reported having a disability. And I should say that at Memorial University, we have approximately 1,600 students who are registered with the Blunden Center Accessibility Services, which represents about 12%. And recognizing that not all students are registered with the Blunden Center, having 12% of the population registered and seeing and hearing from 17%, I felt like those were good numbers. Next slide, Mher. Okay, so here's some of our findings, and Mher is going to dive a little bit more into the one by one when we start to look at the skills. But as an overarching statement, we had 91% of students who participated felt that participating in this work placement prepared them for the workforce. And so when you look at the pretest, you know, we had 93% agree or strongly agree with this statement. And then in the post-test, there was about 3% who strongly disagreed. So I do want to highlight that, but I also want to give some context in the situation that students were placed in. It was during the pandemic. There was virtual placements happening. So that could be influencing why at the end of it, some did not agree with this statement where they all were in agreement in the pre. Next slide, please. Okay, so here's a snapshot of the six skills we looked at to analyze in the pre and post test. Like I said, Mher is going to dive into each one of these data sets a little closer, but this image gives us an overview of the changes that occurred between the pre and post test. 5 of the 6 skills reported higher confidence in the skills that we were analyzing. Creativity and communication had the most significant growth. And I also want to just remind you again that this data was during the pandemic. So that has to be considered when we look at this, of the placements that the students were participating in. And I'm going to throw it over to Mher now to review the individual skills.
Thank you, Danielle. So we'll start with the critical thinking. So we know that it's very important to teach the students the critical thinking skills to make good decisions, understand the consequences of their action, and solve problems. So in this slide, the first question, figuring it out how different ideas fit together. In the pre-test survey, students were overconfident and did not have the practical experience on what critical thinking was. That is why we have little decrease in the post-survey, 6% from 90 to 84, and have more reality check and experience, but still 84% confidence is a high rate. And we can see in the second question, the MUCEP students who participated in the pilot project, their confidence in critical thinking increased 3% from 90 to 93. And the second skill is problem solving, another key competency that students at Memorial University need to have. In the first question, considering the pros and cons of different opinions and decisions, which one is the best, prior to pilot project, again, students had high confidence in problem solving, but after the student worked and had some real ground experience, the reflection of this question in the post-survey decreased by 4% from 91 to 87. But again, 87 is a high confidence. As Danielle mentioned, we need to consider that this is during the COVID time, the environment, and the uncertainty of working again from remotely. In the second question, we can see that in the post-survey, students were more aware of considering the views that are different from their own, and increased 7% from 80 to 87. Another important skill set is collaboration. We all know that collaboration is an important skill in workplace, and working with others and shared goal is important. As we can see in this survey, the confidence in our MUCEP students in terms of collaboration increased in all 3 questions. Creativity, as Danielle mentioned, is one of the highest jump that we saw in the survey. Creativity is one of the student success competencies which we identified, and we want the students at Memorial to gain as much experience on their on-campus job before going to the workplace. In the first question, thinking outside the box, which helps students in their creativity skills. And we can see in the post-survey, there was an increase from 76 to 81, which means that they have gained that experience while working on real life, on the ground, the creativity skill. And in the second question, in the terms of brainstorming ideas in groups, increased by 15%, which is the highest from 71 to 86, which is huge. Again, another skill that was a great increase in our students is the communication skills. We can see in this slide that in question 2, the students were able to express their ideas through writing much better than before starting on their MUCEP job, and 7% increase from 74 to 81. Also in the third question, speaking or presenting in front of groups increased by 10%, which is huge, great, from 49 to 59, which means that the students that are working at the MUCEP are able to have that skill set while working and increasing their communication skills. The last skill that we analyzed is the digital literacy. In today's digital and technological world, we want our students to be familiar with current, new, and evolving technology. In the first question, we can see that students' confidence in using software to create slides and charts for presenting increased 5% from 84 to 89. And in the second question, prior to actual work, students had high confidence, 90%, in terms of creating and formatting documents. But after completion of their MUCEP job, that confidence went down 6% to 84. Again, still high number, but again, while working, they have gained new experiences, new skills. That's why maybe their confidence went down a little bit. And again, as we mentioned before, the gain experiences, which is professionalism and adaptability, and what employers work is slightly different wording, which is work ethic and resilience. In terms of communication skills that our students gain, writing and verbal, it's the same communication skills that employers want, which Lisa talked about previously in the slides. Problem solving and research, they gained, our students, and desired skills from the employers is problem solving and analytical skills, a little bit different wording. Again, teamwork and leadership, we can see those in, again, desired skills by the employer, which is teamwork, and collaboration, which is also part of leadership. Now, Danielle is going to talk about what our grant holders thought about our process.
Thank you, Mher. So hearing from the supervisors was critical to understanding this process, especially because they are key stakeholders in ensuring the students reflect and make connections. So out of our supervisor survey results, we heard back from we had 82% response rate. And out of this return rate, 94% were returning supervisors. So they had had a MUCEP prior, so they were familiar with the old way of doing things. So there was a bit of a learning curve because we made slight adjustments to how the student and the supervisor were meant to interact. 58% of grant holders agreed or strongly agreed that the new process was effective, and 42% were neutral. 61% felt that the student success competencies were helpful in directing the check-in conversations, and 31% were neutral. 69% felt that check-ins helped the student recognize the skills they were developing from their placement, and so they were a good prompt and a great way for them to make connections. And 81% felt that there were adequate resources for the new process. But we did take some feedback from supervisors, because we realized people learn in different ways. So we had a lot of guides provided, but we've adjusted it since from this feedback for the winter 2022 semester, and now have a bit more visual resources, checklists, text as well as videos provided to supervisors to help ensure that everyone is getting what they need to be able to implement this enhancement. And also 64% felt supported by Student Life and 12% were neutral. So I think, like I said, the key takeaways here that this was a pilot and it was a huge learning curve for everyone. And although we made slight changes to the program, we tried to make it simpler but have a larger impact. So instead of learning reflection and writing everything down and students doing that very independently, we took away that document and had the student and the supervisors meet up for regular check-ins and have the conversation and try to make those connections. So I'm going to throw it back to Mher for additional supervisor feedback.
Thank you, Danielle. So some of the feedback that we got from the supervisors, and I'm going to read them. I believe this initiative is a step in the right direction for students in terms of their ability to think about their MUCEP skills gained from the position. However, in terms of the actual process of hiring and meeting with the MUCEP student, it didn't change things much for me relative to how I supervised students in the past. I think the students, but one especially, did a good job with self-check-ins, which increased communication. As we mentioned, the communication skills was one of the increase that our students gained. And thank you for the continued work and enhancements for the project. I really like the program and have had success with one of the students who was rehired twice. The student was a second author on a recently published paper in our group that appears to attracting attention in the environmental chemistry community. If it weren't for MUCEP, I'm not sure it would have been successful in this work. And finally, another quote from a feedback from a supervisor: the program is great and it is of mutual benefit to students, staff, and faculty. Keep on. And some of the limitations that we had in our study and our survey is that pre-test was implemented later than expected, leaving less time between pre and post surveys. Survey tours was one used for all RBC funded projects across Canada and not specific to our program. So that's why there were some of the questions were a little bit, we felt that it doesn't apply to us, but since we were using the RBC tool, we cannot change that. Pandemic had impacted opportunity to engage in certain activities, such as networking, which some of the students mentioned in the survey. Some questions were not relevant to students in post-secondary, that is age. Supervisor and students interactions, we cannot control it, but we all definitely make sure that they had that meetings and check-ins. And supervisor feedback, difficult semester to be making changes, again, as Danielle mentioned, due to pandemic, due to working remotely, or sometimes from the office, sometimes in person. So that was some of the limitations that we had. And I'll give back to Danielle to tell what's next.
Next slide. Perfect. Thank you. So the work continues. We are, very hopeful from the results we received, and we are currently analyzing winter 2022 data. We had hoped it would be ready for this presentation to be able to share that, and we have the same 4 academic units and 2 non-academic units participating, and we actually have an increase in student participation. So right now we have 88 who completed the pre, 91 who completed the post, and we're looking to not only analyze that semester but also compare it to fall 2021 results as well. So as Mher had mentioned in the previous, a next step for us is we've started to do this, is to update our survey that we were sent out, and we have updated our survey because, like Mher had mentioned, some of the questions that we didn't have much flexibility in adjusting didn't really reflect our own program learning outcomes. So we have now made those adjustments. And so we will be assessing that on a go forward basis. And our questions are more in tune with what we're trying to capture for on-campus employment. Like some of the questions were, are you, 15 to 18? And that just wasn't applicable to the population we were surveying. So we have made those adjustments. Something else that we are doing for next steps is we are looking at differences. So that student data to be able to see, the field of study, year of study, the type of jobs these students are gravitating to. So like the work is endless. It's a very exciting prospects to better understand on-campus employment and see where our students are gravitating towards and better understand the impact that it's having for some of these students. We have phased out the learning and reflection agreement, and we are transitioning to Memorial's online record of experience to facilitate reflection and data collection. So that has since happened in the winter with the pilot, and now on a go forward basis for the spring semester. So it's really great to get in front of the Memorial community and say that this is the direction that we are heading. It is going to be on a go forward basis, rolled out in all on-campus employment. So particularly MUCEP and ISWEP right now would be embracing this new process of having conversations and very intentional conversations between the supervisor and the student, both having the resources they need to come to the table and have those conversations. And in the future, looking to compare the impact of MUCEP, ISWEP to non-MUCEP, ISWEP students who are not participating in on-campus employment versus those that are, and seeing if it has any impact on GPA, retention, how long it's just endless. It's super exciting in the work that we're doing, and seeing how this impacts students who graduate. Did it influence the decisions post-graduation when they are picking their careers? There's a lot to look at here and unpack. And so that's going to be more of an intensive piece that we're looking to do over the next couple of years to better understand on-campus employment as a high-impact practice and see where those touch points are and the impact that it's having for our students and how it influences decisions in their career and in their academics. So yeah, it's very exciting times ahead, but we have a lot of work to do and we're continuing to move it forward. So Mher, and I believe that we have the references there, which if you click on, and we'll go to the Q&A, but I will go right here. This is where I'd like to land for a second. If you wanted to scan the QR code, it will take you to our page that has all our resources, our guides, as well as the student success competencies that we had discussed. So feel free to check that out, including this presentation will be there. So if you want to go back and look at any of the references that we provided, they will be listed as well.
I'm just going to jump in there very quickly as well, Danielle, and just say that Mher, as you referenced, Memorial's online record of experience, has those student success competencies built into it, so that students, as they complete reflection activities in Mher, are able to see how they're progressing toward the achievement of all 10 of those student success competencies, and then continue to seek out opportunities where they identify for themselves, for example, that maybe they have a gap. And so it really puts that information right at the fingertips of students as they go through their university experiences, trying to make sure that they achieve this well-rounded development across all 10 of these competencies.
Thank you, Lisa. I'm going to actually just drop in the chat as well the link to Mher. So if anyone would like more information on Memorial's online record of experience, and as Lisa had alluded to, all of on-campus employment currently lives in there now. And so we are getting the supervisor's role would be the first touch point to get students thinking about what they're learning, what they're developing, and then students can take that away and plug it into Mher. And it acts as like a digital document that holds what they've done, but also shows what they've developed in terms of the student success competencies and the time they've committed to their on-campus employment. So I
happy to
think,
take questions or
yes.
discuss what. Absolutely. Over to you folks.
Okay, this is Janice speaking. We have about 15 minutes left. So I'm checking the chat. I don't see any questions in the chat, but please feel free to enter a question in the chat, or you can turn on your microphone and ask a question as well. So we'll give a couple of minutes for people to enter questions they have, or to turn on the mic and ask a question.
And if anyone was in the pilot and would like to, share their experience, would love to hear it.
Yes.
Well, I'll just say one thing. I wasn't aware of Mher, so it's kind of nice to we do have MUCEP students here at CITL quite frequently, and I'm not an administrator, so I probably wouldn't have known about it from that perspective. But it is interesting to know that this is available.
We have a question from Julia.
Julia, yep. Can you talk a little about the reflection process with students after their MUCEP experience is over? So I will say, in terms of the pilot piece, and Mher, you can speak to this as well, there was prompts and a guide for students. So the students were provided with resources to help them think about those questions that we want them to make those connections to, and then the employer or the supervisor would be provided with the resource as well. In terms of when Mher did a really great job prompting those conversations and those individuals to come together and have those conversations. And then when the reflection is over, I lean back into Mher as well, because then the student would take what was discussed or what they interpreted from those conversations. The system of Mher, so maybe I should be speaking a bit more of that, Memorial's Online Record of Experience. As I had said, all on campus is already tagged with the student success competencies. And when a student is selected for an on-campus employment, it is linked to Mher, which lives in the same system that they apply for jobs to. They are the successful candidate, it would be linked to their account. However, there is, for that to be actually, I guess, plotted on their account, stamped on their record, they would have to fill out 3 reflection questions. Those reflection questions are very similar to the types of questions that we are prompting the supervisor to ask. We are prompting the student to think about. So once those conversations have happened, students then, when the reflection is over, instead of filling out a learning and reflection agreement, would go into their account, answer the questions and more, and then very proudly it would be stamped on their record, which then they can share with graduate schools, employers, to show their MUCEP position, their ISWEP position, what they did, and what they learned from it in terms of competencies.
Yeah, and a lot of grant holders were very happy that we were giving them direction or check-ins, reminders, because we know that they are busy and everything. And even students, they were very open with the change. And again, as Danielle said, at the end of that, when they did their MUCEP, I was sending them email and directing them to do the reflection on Mher, so that it's, again, sometimes when students go and on the ground and interview, they sometimes are not prepared, or they don't know what skills they had in those 3, 4, 5 years that they are in the university. And by having this MUCEP and the transcript that they can share, they can say, yes, I learned communication skills, I was doing this project, I was a team leader, and all those transferable skills that we've been talking, they can give examples while answering interview questions.
This is a really exciting change for MUCEP. And I see a comment there from Luann. The program has been very effective with our student employees, and she loves hearing about the connections they're making. And again, this is really about taking on-campus employment and thinking about it differently, not just as a means through which students earn money for whatever expenses they may have, but really thinking about their employment with us in our campus positions as transformative learning experiences and learning opportunities as well, and how can we best support that learning and their intentional planning of that learning as well, which is where Mher provides that really critical ability for students to kind of track their progress toward the again, that well-rounded achievement of all 10 of those student success competencies. Denise, were you about to say something?
No, I was just encouraging people to ask more questions.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I think I'll just say one more thing to keep on Lisa's point is that it puts the supervisor in the driver's seat and the student in the driver's seat. There is dual ownership in this. The supervisor would be investing in the connections that the student is making, and often that relationship, because we all know we all get very busy, we have these students working for us, but carving out time to have a conversation, the student, there's like almost a sense of loyalty, you're investing in them, you're asking those questions, and I feel like it provides, the student is forced to think about what they're learning, which will benefit them down the road in their career endeavors, in their engagement. And the supervisor is forced to, and not forced, but encouraged to invest in the student that they're working with as well. And actually what we saw between the fall.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, so I was just saying, between the fall and the winter, we had a number of students come back, and it's worth looking into to see if there was some loyalty and relationships that were established that these students who participate in the fall went back and worked again with their supervisor in the winter.
Okay, thank you. Question from Lisa. What advice would you give students that do not feel they're getting much from the position they have been hired for?
So I think there's a role there for both the supervisor and the student. I think the supervisor, perhaps historically, where the learning reflection was done very independently, students may have felt that they were a bit more siloed on their own and maybe not making those connections. But I think with the supervisor involved a little more, and again, these conversations are like 15, 20 minutes in the scheme of the 40 or the 80 hours that you're working with a student, helping them to see what is transferable in the work that they're doing, the value that they're bringing the unit. So I also think Mher allows another step further, that if maybe the supervisor and the student, that is not discovered, I think Mher provides the student with the language of what they're learning from the experience they've been hired for, so that hopefully on a go forward basis, they're more confident when they see, oh, I was a lab assistant. This is what that translates as. This is what I did, but these are the skills that I developed. Mher provides them with the platform and the language to see those connections. But the hope is that the supervisor would work with the student to help them recognize the value and all that they're bringing to the unit, as well as the skills that they're developing.
And there's two ways that can play out. So sometimes the student actually does have a perfectly great position, but the student kind of is not seeing what they're getting from that position. And then there are times where a student, often because the supervisor may not have the time or the capacity to really invest in a learning opportunity for that student, and the student actually is not engaged in meaningful work. Where it's a matter of the student identifying that what they can take away, that's where Mher can really step in and really help that student realize, oh, there was more to this than I thought. But as Danielle said, that dialogue between this student and their supervisor is really a key part of the learning, and a key part of addressing where there are those gaps between what students are wanting to learn or the kinds of exposures they want to have in these on-campus employment positions, and sometimes the opportunities that are available to them. And as Danielle said, that speaks to the students' confidence sometimes to be able to initiate some of those conversations in a practical and meaningful way. And again, some of this work will support that development as well.
And just to add one more thing, we also created a document that on the first day, expectation, as Lisa mentioned, expectation of what the student wants from this job, what they want to gain, and then having that conversation with the grantholder, it will give them direction that you're going to gain this experience, you're going to gain this or that. So we created that documents and we sent to the grantholders that when they're meeting on the first day, kind of like onboarding an employee, because then the MUCEP are like kind of an internal employees for them, giving them direction on what is expected and what they will gain. And I think Megan has another question.
Okay, so we have a comment from Megan. In the interest of time, I won't read it word for word, but you guys can read it there. But just sort of the last piece, there many students return to work, you know, to the same MUCEPs with us for many semesters. There is a comment from Megan about the tediousness of the form, so maybe we can address this. And the pilot, does the pilot have the opportunity for students to elaborate on how they're developing, how they've developed or grown after working at MUCEP for multiple semesters? So we do have about 3 minutes if you guys would like to address that.
Yeah, no, so you'll be glad to know, Megan, that those tedious learning reflection forms will not be part of the process on a go-forward basis. There will be, like I said, resources to help with the dialogue between the supervisor and the student, but the students will not be independently filling up those learning reflection forms and sending them back into us. I think that's a really great point. So the pilot it's no longer a pilot. So the pilot has now moved into something that we are implementing for the spring. It will be rolling out the way we had piloted back in the fall. But I think right now we have standard questions, but I think you raise a really great point that there could be some work done in terms of, you know, if you're in your first year, or your first semester working with this unit versus your second time working with this particular unit and your third as different reflection prompts. I do think that the resources that we provide are very general, and I think as you set up expectations with the students you're working with, they may be a little bit different. So that would prompt different conversations along the way in the first checkout and the second check-in with the supervisor. But I think you raise a really great point.
Okay, we've got about 90 seconds. If anyone has a last question. Okay, just a thank you from Megan.
We thank you all for your interest in this topic, because it is yet another way that we can think about how we are educating and helping our students transform during their time at Memorial. And so we're really excited to be kind of pushing the boundaries on how effective, how much learning can we squeeze into all of those opportunities for our students. So on-campus employment is one of those prime opportunities. So thank you so much.